Coming to you from an undisclosed location, this is the Higher Frequency. I am your host, Mike Booth, and tonight we have a great story. Tonight we will talk about the Ariel Children. The Ariel Children happened on the 16th of September of 1994.
What happened? Who was there? Who was involved? All this and more. How's everybody doing tonight? Welcome to the Higher Frequency. I am your host, Mike Booth. We are still having fun with this old-timey radio. I love it. We will figure out something with that. Tonight, I wanted to talk about the Ariel Children. A buddy of mine introduced me to this story. He sent me a link on this, and I was really intrigued by it because at first I thought, this could be one of those mass hysteria, because that happens. You get one person who sees something, 10 more see the same thing mysteriously after a few minutes. Yeah. So there was a game that we used to play in school where one person would sit and say elephant, and then they'd whisper it into the friend of their next person that's next to them. It'll go all the way down the room. By the time it gets to the other side, it says, I love you, or I haven't seen it, or, it had changed just so much, so drastically from all the other different people adding their own little piece or take of the story. And that's what happens normally with people. And, it's not uncommon that this happens. But it really intrigued me because not only did the story not change, but there was 64 people involved in the story. So 64 people all saw the same thing, which has me very intrigued, to say the least. What is happening here? Was it mass hysteria? Was it just everybody in a trance seeing the same thing? Or was everybody just making it all up? I don't know, but we're going to talk about it. So this story starts in Rua, and it was September 1994. 64 children were out in Zimbabwe, at a very wealthy school in Zimbabwe. And they were out to recess, and they had thought that they were gone for just a few minutes, like 5 minutes. And apparently the children had been gone for almost an hour, and nobody could figure out where they were and why they didn't come back all together like they normally did. So the teachers were worried, and they ended up finding out, the students came back, but the students had all had an encounter. And this is where it gets really interesting, because all of these kids are from a wealthy background. They don't really need any publicity. And in fact, most of them wouldn't want the publicity because their parents would be very strict of this sort of thing. Speaking about aliens and crafts and different things like that, sometimes it's frowned upon the, let's just call it the elite circles that don't want to be seen as somebody who deals in that sort of thing, let alone their children. So this gets a little interesting because when they returned from their break, they went to speak to their teachers, and 64 children now, mind you, 64 children all had the same story, that they had seen a very large ship with about 5 little ships around it, landing in a field just out front of their view. All of the children, not all of them, but half of the children, were close enough to where they could feel it and were scared by it. the children remember a noise that sounded like a flute being played in the air as the craft landed. That noise terrified, and when I say terrified, it terrified this group of kids. They had bad dreams about it. They talked about it, said it was something like sleep paralysis. It was akin to sleep paralysis, where they couldn't move, but they could hear the noises that the craft would make. The children all said that they saw the same thing. Door opening up, and what they said was men, which I thought was kind of interesting. We'll get back to that later, why I think that that part's interesting. But they said that they were men at about 4.5 feet. So about 4 foot, 4.5 feet of height. And the thing that was really surprising that all of them seemed to say was that they all had a type of slanted black eyes that went up the side of their helmet or mask or whatever they were wearing. They had a very small mouth and very small nose that you couldn't really notice. But the eyes were in a weird shape that went up and backwards. And they said that they looked very evil. Now, this is all of these children are saying this. Now, this is 64 different individual children that were all spread out. Everybody had their own part of the story. And what I find very interesting about this story is that it didn't change. Like what I said earlier, most times the stories that you hear will change. And when I heard the story and the children said that it was men that came out of the ship, or the craft, I thought instantly maybe pilots of some new type of craft, like a military, something of that nature. That's what first came to my mind. But then the stories got a little different. What had happened is each child had a vision of a horrific image of an impending doom, like the world ending, fires, civilizations burning, and lots of death. Now, this is in 1994. I'm wondering what vision did they see, and why they were all given a different vision when it comes to that part of it. Some said that they seen images, just flickering images that went by really fast. Some said that they had actual visions of a heroic, I won't say heroic, but we'll say like a horrific ending. It's interesting to me because they said men, which made me feel like these were men wearing suits, but all of the 64 children said that they did not look human. There is a creature, I can't remember the name of the creature, from right outside of their town in Zimbabwe. There is a creature, and it is called the Tikaloshi. And the Tikaloshi is a type of demon. And I think that that's interesting because instead of just coming up with this random folklore demon, the Tikaloshi and these little men that they saw share a common trait. They both have eyes that kind of go up and outwards. They both have gray skin, and they are both at about 4.5 feet. So some of the kids knew the story of the Tikaloshi, and they considered these creatures them. And I think that that's very interesting because that's what they drew inspiration from. And it's kind of funny to me that it's so close to what the other children were saying that were on different spots around the craft. The story didn't change. They went home. They told their parents about what had happened. The parents were very angry because they didn't send their kids to the school, which is a very expensive school, to be learning about UFOs and nonsense like that. So the parents came by later and was very upset with the teachers because they wanted to know where the teachers were, why they weren't there. And the teachers said that they had been gone for a long time, like almost an hour. And to the children, they said it was only around 15 minutes. So it had been as if time had stopped around them. And this is where it gets really interesting because they flew out investigators, a Cynthia Hind and John Mack, and they came to interview the children. And what was so interesting about it was that they had kind of grilled these kids to experience, to understand what they had experienced. They had grilled them so difficult throughout the ones, and none of them changed their story. All of them, 64 children, all had the same similar story, and they stuck with it. They didn't change it. They didn't alter it. The only thing that changed or altered between the children's stories was the audio sound that they heard. One girl equated it to a flute being played in the sky. A lot of the others said it was a buzzing or a humming sound, which it's kind of interesting that would be the only really deviation of the whole story. But I find it interesting that the news got a hold of this and started to run a story, the BBC. They went up there and they quizzed these kids, and they asked them what colors that they saw, what any characteristical traits that they all kind of noticed. And all 64 said that the crafts were silver, the men that came out of them were silver, like a grayish silver, and that they all witnessed some kind of a horrific moment in their mind as they were paralyzed to move, sort of like a sleep paralysis, that they couldn't move. They knew that they could move, but they could not move. And they seen these creatures walking up to them. Now, to me, I find that very interesting because most times 64 people are going to have a story. They're going to switch up. They're going to flip up a little bit. There's going to be some kind of discrepancies. There's going to be something that makes that stand out. And the fact that they all said that they had pointy eyes, they all said that they walked towards them. To me, I find that kind of interesting. I think that's one of these weird moments where you have to question, was it a mass hysteria? Did all 64 people just make this up? And like I said, some of the things that they saw at that time could have been mistaken for, and we went over this in my previous podcast, it could have been rockets reentry, weather balloons. There's a slew of things that it could have been. But the fact that they all said the pointy eyes is what has me really intrigued. All of them said that. Not, if it was one or two, that could be something, I could have let that go. But all of them said that they had pointy eyes, which makes me think of a helmet or something like that. I don't know quite what that could be. I have heard of things like false memories, implanted memories, and we know now of what they call the Mandela effect, which is, for those of you who don't know, Mandela passed away in 2013, and some people have a memory of Mandela passing away in prison, and some people have a memory of him passing away in 2013. So it's different that, multiple people throughout the world have a completely different story that in their mind of what happened. There's Tiananmen Square, where a tank rolled out. Some people remember this man standing in front of a tank and, he's smacking the tank and the tank stops and it can't go around him. And he's just like, yeah. And he's like, he's standing up for his cause. He doesn't move. He doesn't back down. The tank it can't go forward unless it kills the guy. And it doesn't. But some people some people remember the story different. They remember him standing in front of that tank and the tank just running him over, just crushing him completely in a horrible death, which is a very vastly different story. So this Mandela effect definitely is an interesting thing, how somebody could remember one thing and somebody could have a totally different memory of one of these events. But this is 64 kids that all had the same story. Now think about that for a second. When have you ever seen children come up to you and just tell you the same story without embellishing it or adding extra flavor to it? Like, no, it was this, it was that. Like, never, never. So for me, this is where this story gets interesting. I mean, this is 64 people having the same experience, nobody faltering, nobody changing their mind. Think about that for a second. That is an interesting one. I don't know where to go with that. Similar thing happened in Melbourne, where cigar-shaped craft landed right outside of a field, but that was 200 students, not just 64. I mean, that's a lot larger number, but they also had a different shaped ship. It didn't look like a flying saucer. And these kids, 64 of them, saw a flying saucer, a giant flying saucer, mind you, not just a little one, a flying city. It was gigantic, and it had 5 little ships around it. I have heard or seen videos of similar things that are kind of like that, with flying ships that are kind of in the air, and they all similarly look like that. It's one giant main ship with a few little side ships that are kind of floating around it. And I found it interesting that all of the kids said that they had flashing lights, and all of the kids, mind you, 64 of them, all said the exact same colors. They said that it was the only thing is a few of them changed it to like, so the colors were red, green, and yellow. And some of them said amber or auburn. Some of them said different, like a haze of a different color, but it was still the same color. So I find that very interesting. I don't know. With that, this was the story of a very interesting mass hysteria. This is the story of kids just being kids. What would we call this? I don't know. But what they do call this is the Ariel Children. And I, for one, I am kind of fascinated by this. These children are still around, and they go to conferences, and they stand up and they tell their tale, and they let people know what happened to them when they were children. And I'd be really blown away to be able to speak, to one of them, just to hear what their side of the story is and to see what happened. With that, this has been the Ariel Children. Interesting story. I don't know where to go with that. It's 64 people. That's wild. Yeah, this was a quick one. It was an interesting tale. I wanted to get that out there. This is one of those, I don't know. You be the judge. Do you think it was a mass hysteria, rocket reentry, Mandela effect? What do you think? Real case? Fake case? I don't know. Look it up for yourself. The Ariel Children. And with that, I think we'll call this a night. You let me know what you think down in the comments. Leave me something. All right. This has been the Higher Frequency. I'm your host, Mike Booth. As always, peace.